Hi, this is Peter Blanton, and I'm doing my final assignment for AEP855 Educational Leadership. The first article that I found that I had some interest in is called "Something is Missing from Teacher Education, Attention to Two Genders." Some lines out of this article are listed here. Assumptions about gender roles continue to limit children's aspirations and achievements. If we are to overcome those limitations, gender equity must become a standard part of curriculum of pre-service education. To summarize this article, I found these three main points here. First one being, very few teacher educators are preparing their pre-service education students to teach equitably in their classrooms. Second, 75% of education teaching instructors think that teaching gender equity is very important, but teach only about 2 hours a semester of it. And finally, colleges must decide if gender equity has a legitimate place in their curriculum of pre-service teacher education. The challenges that are brought up in this article are stated here. Why is it considered masculine to be violent or aggressive? Why is it considered feminine to be nurturant or intuitive? Why are arts, languages, and music considered feminine subjects in school while math, science, and technology are considered masculine subjects? And even though awareness of gender issues are very apparent, gender equity is not a hot topic. How can we make it a hot topic? And the last challenge brought up in this article was, how can teacher education programs effectively make gender equity part of their curriculum? And how is this relevant to administrators or me as a future administrator is, this article provides some statistics that show big differences in gender achievement. And I think as an administrator, you need to be aware of methods of correcting low achievement. Whether it be if it was females or males having the low achievement and trying to equal out those as best you could. Second, new teachers need prepared for what may help their students have the best chance to succeed. And I think hiring the best teacher candidate is crucial to a successful school. And as an administrator, you need to be aware of things that you can look for as hiring a new teacher to your staff. Third, influences in classrooms that limit children's aspirations and achievements need to be eliminated. As an administrator looks to help every child succeed, anything that holds a child back needs to be addressed. The second article that I found was called Greater Equity in Education. Some lines out of this article are stated here. The evidence shows that equity can go hand in hand with quality, and that reducing school failure strengthens individuals' and society's capacities to respond to recession and contribute to economic growth and social well-being. This means that investing in high-quality schooling and equal opportunities for all from early years to at least the end of upper secondary is the most profitable educational policy. Some summary points of this article. First, the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has put considerable focus on improving equity in education outcomes. In 2000, the OECD developed an international testing program called the PISA, which measures the skills of 15-year-olds in more than 60 different countries from around the world. In February 2012, the OECD released a report suggesting ways schools could increase equity based on policies and practices. The first way was to eliminate grade repetition. Second was avoid early tracking of students. Third, manage school choice so it doesn't lead to equity. Fourth, make funding more responsive to differing needs. And 5, have more high-quality pathways in secondary education. The challenges this article brought forward, number 1 was few education systems have securely embedded all these recommendations, even though they are grounded in many years of research. 2, advocating changes doesn't lead to their adoption, even when from a prestigious organization. 3, shifting the education policy debate from a focus on competition among schools to a focus on improving all schools. And finally, creating appropriate policy and practices in schools will take significant effort over long periods of time. And how is this relevant to me as the future administrator is, first, when changes need to occur in a school, the administrator has to be the one leading the change. Second, administrators need to research best practices and incorporate them into their school. Third, creating greater equity in education starts with a strong school leader. And fourth, administrators need to build support for specific policies and practices, as well as building people's skills and understanding implementing those policies and practices. The next article that I found was More Equity in Education, the Chilean Students' Public Outcry. I like this article just because it wasn't the U.S., something from the U.S. I want to see what other countries were doing as far as equity goes. Some lines out of this article was the current education model based on a mixed provision, which appears to produce advantages for the private sector, is not perceived as favorable by the majority of the population. Some summary points of this article was it's got a vigorous student movement opposing profit making among education providers that has triggered widespread social activity. Second, families can only access various schooling options depending on their income and payment capabilities. Third, beyond this movement, the public is questioning Chile's prevailing educational model. And finally, private education providers are getting high profits and receiving public subsidies on top of it. The challenges this article has brought forth is, number one, the public is unhappy about the inequity and unfairness of education opportunities in Chile. 7 out of 10 university students are the first generation to reach this educational level, and half of those students will actually drop out before they even get a degree. Third, because of concern about the low quality of municipal schools, private education providers have been quite successful at attracting students to their schools. And finally, overall public opinion wants more powerful state participation in education while ensuring citizens' rights. How is this relevant to me as a future administrator is, number one, administrators need to be able to see the benefits of public versus private education and vice versa, whether they're working in a public or a private sector. Number two, students' opinions should matter, and administrators need to take into account what their students are saying. And in this article, it's the majority of the article is talking about how the students made this movement. Number three, no matter where you are, people value quality and fair education. Number four, administrators need to let parents know the focus of education is to help students to become more successful adults. And the next article I found was states districts move to require virtual classes. Some lines out of this article was, the reality is when a student leaves us, whether they're going to a four-year college or a technical college, or going into the world of work, they're going to have to do an online course. I thought this article was very interesting considering, we're taking virtual classes right now as part of our continuing education. Summarizing this article, it talked about how schools all over the U.S. are adopting online learning graduation requirements. However, there's concerns that remain over student equity, particularly in rural areas where high-speed internet access may be difficult or uncommon. Schools need to adapt to the needs of students by providing whatever is needed to ensure the student be treated fairly, and some corporations are even stepping up to offer deals to students that receive free school lunches. The challenges this article has brought, number one, is providing students with the same opportunities. Number two, providing funding to purchase some form of mobile computing device for students that have no means of getting one. Number three, keeping the cost down and from cutting in-person teaching jobs in order to have these online opportunities. And number four, convincing the stakeholders that online learning is a legitimate way of delivering instruction. How is this relevant to administrators or to me as a future administrator is, number one, administrators need to see the value of teaching students in a way that is now the norm of colleges. If the colleges are to this point, don't you think it'd be important to teach the kids in preparing them for college? Number two, administrators will have to look at the funding issues that go along with requiring online classes. Sure, you're not paying for a room with lights and everything on, but you are paying for some access to the internet in some way or another. Number three, administrators need to be advocates for positive changes in education that better students' chance of succeeding. And the final article that I came across was Race in Schools, the Need for Action. Some lines out of this article was, in a nation with 44% non-white students and extreme inequality in educational attainment, it's time we address these issues as seriously as we did during the civil rights era. In summary of this article, Education policy has ignored the issues of racial changes in America. 3 steps were identified for educational reform. The first step is for educators to recognize and demand changes in the racial conditions outside the school that make their work so much harder. The second is to demand that there be a civil rights agenda for our schools. And the third is to develop and implement training and support plans to give the nation's teachers the skills they need to better work with students of all backgrounds and to teach with materials and practices that fully recognize the contribution of all cultures and races in the United States of America. They also brought 3 things that most powerfully influence education outcomes, and those are families, teachers, and other students. Also, for over 27 years, there's been no significant federal funds used to address issues of race in schools in America. And finally, schools are becoming more and more diverse while nothing is being done to better educate the changing population. The challenges this article brought is number 1, acquiring funds to provide training to faculty about race and segregation, since the U.S. no longer provides it. How a school can come up with those funds to better, equip their teachers. Number 2, how to change something that hasn't been addressed for so long. If it's been 27 years since there's been even any federal funds used on this, then it's been at least 27 years since it actually was a norm to actually talk about it in schools. And number 3, with the U.S.'s changing population, has to be met by an education workforce ready to serve all the students. And how this applies to me as a future administrator is administrators need to lead the way to racial equality. 2, school success depends upon how things are done and whose best interest is identified. Number 3, administrators need to look at the research on race in schools and apply it to their situation. And finally, administrators need to recognize the need for action. Need for action rests upon, first, leaders of the school, second, leaders of the community, third, leaders of the state, and finally, leaders of our nation. Here is my references for my articles. I enjoy looking up these articles. I know that I kind of bounced around a little bit on what to talk about and with different areas, but I thought it'd be more applicable if I could find more things, more variety in the areas that I was talking about. And I appreciate you taking the time to look at my presentation. Thank you.